Hello, welcome back to finding more x-intercepts. Today is the third day of this lesson, so I'm going to quickly review what we did on the first 2 days. With this equation right here, y equals x squared plus 7x plus 10. So I'm going to find the x-intercepts of that equation two different ways, the two ways that I've showed you so far this week. On Monday I showed you how to factor. So if you want to factor this, you want to find the two numbers that multiply to give C, which is 10, and add to give B, which is 7, and those numbers are 5 and 2. So instead of going straight to that step, I wrote this in here. 0 equals the equation instead of y equals, because remember, we're trying to figure out what do we plug in for x to make y equal to 0. So we went this whole side of the equation to equal 0, so that y equals 0. So 0 is going to be equal to what? What do we put in for x to make it equal to 0? Well, there's going to be two different answers because there's going to be two different x-intercepts. There's going to be the factored form of x plus 2 times x plus 5. Now, like I was saying on Monday, the two answers are either one of them is what can we put into the first parenthesis? That's going to be a negative 2. What can we put into the second parenthesis? That's going to be a negative 5 to make either one of those equal to 0. And a step that I skipped on Monday is right here. Break this up into two separate problems if you want to. X plus 2 equals 0, meaning what do we put in for x to make it equal to 0? Well, we put in a negative 2. We solve for x. We subtract 2 to the other side, and we get x equals negative 2. And here, what do we put in for x plus 5 to make it equal to 0? A negative 5. We solve for x. What does x have to be to make this equal to 0? Negative 5. Negative 5 plus 5 is equal to 0. So that's the factoring method. The answer, the x-intercepts would be negative 2 and negative 5. Now, the more complicated one is the quadratic formula, which I left that part off right here, that x equals. This quadratic formula is just another way to figure out what x equals. So x is going to be equal to whatever this formula gives us. So I substitute in the numbers, 7 for B, 1 for A, 10 for C. And I get this, negative 7 plus or minus the square root of 49 minus 40 over 2. 49 minus 40 is 9, and the square root of 9 is 3. So the way we get two answers, like we did over here, is we have this plus or minus. That's why the plus or minus is there. So negative 7 plus 3 over 2, or negative 7 minus 3 over 2. Negative 7 plus 3 is negative 4, and negative 7 minus 3 is negative 10. Negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2, and negative 10 divided by 2 is negative 5. So you can do either one of these methods in this problem to figure out what the x-intercepts are. If it factors nicely like it does, factoring is quicker and easier. But you can always use this method. This method will always work. It's a little bit more work, but it still gets you to negative 2 and negative 5. Now, this is what the graph of that equation would look like. We figured out that the x-intercepts are negative 2 and negative 5. So that's where the graph crosses the x-axis at, is negative 5 and negative 2. If you remember from Monday, C, 10, is always the y-intercept, because the y-intercept is going to be an ordered pair that's 0, comma something. The x-coordinate is always going to be 0. So if we plug in a 0 for x, we get 0 plus 0 plus 10, y equals 10. So remember, the number that's by itself, C, is always the y-intercept. So the y-intercept is 10. Here's our x-intercepts. Here's pretty much what the parabola looks like that we just figured out the x-intercepts for. Now, you are going to run across cases like this, where the parabola is up above the x-axis and therefore never crosses the x-axis. That's perfectly possible. And if that happens, there are no x-intercepts. So you will have problems where there won't be any x-intercepts, and basically there won't be any solutions. Because remember, there's 4 ways to say what we're doing. One of them is find an x-intercept. Another way to say it is find the solution. Another way is find the root. Another way is find the 0. So if they say, are there solutions? And if the answer is no, that means the graph looks something like this. It doesn't cross the x-axis. And that's what your homework today is going to be like. When you look at the directions, it's going to say solve for b squared minus 4ac. it's going to say solve for this inside the parenthesis or inside the square root symbol. The reason they want you to do that is because if you end up with a negative number inside your square root symbol, there is no answer to that. You can't take the square root of a negative number unless you start getting into imaginary numbers, which is a different lesson. So what two numbers multiply together to give -9, or what one number multiplies together to give -9? It's not -3, because a negative times a negative is a positive. So -3 squared is actually +9. So is +3 squared. There is no one single number that if you square it, it'll give you a -9, or in this case, a -8. So this is an example of a no solution problem here. X squared plus 2x plus 3. I plug the numbers in for the proper letter, and we end up with 4 minus 12, which is -8. The square root of -8 doesn't exist, therefore there are no x-intercepts, so the graph would look something like this. So that's the homework tonight, is just use that portion, the b squared minus 4ac of the quadratic formula, to see if your answer is going to be positive or negative. If it's negative, there's no solution. If it's positive, there is, and there will be x-intercepts. So this hopefully gets some of you guys on the right path if you've been a little bit confused this week, and it'll also help you with Wednesday's homework. So there you go. Enjoy.